So the first speech is an adapted version of a speech given at a Friends of the Earth conference. Everybody ready? Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Friends of the Earth Europe conference on Europe's land use. I would like, first of all, to thank Judith Merkies MEP for helping us to organise the event and for kindly attending to make the keynote speech. As a leading figure in Parliament when it comes to environmental issues, we are very excited and grateful that she has been able to take time out of her busy schedule to support this important conference. Friends of the Earth Europe has been working on resource use and land use for a number of years now, focusing on developing a practical approach to measuring the resource use of our continent, of a company, or indeed of a product. The approach that we developed with the Sustainable Europe Research Institute, or SERI, in Vienna, is now becoming widely supported as the Commission starts to implement its resource efficiency roadmap. Over the years, our other campaigns have covered specific resource use issues, such as timber, biofuels, meat, and dairy consumption. In the 1990s, however, Friends of the Earth championed the idea of having an environmental space. Now, this was a very simple concept, but one which was completely radical in its implications. The idea was that there are limits on the ecosystem services that we can consume without causing irreversible damage to our planet. At the same time, we must ensure that we distribute the use of these resources equitably across the world. We must all realise and promote the idea that living among an abundance of resources is a true privilege for us as humans. However, we also need to bear in mind that only a few of us are fortunate enough to live in such a way. It is an undeniable fact that developed nations, including those in Europe, import most of the resources that they consume. In the case of land, for example, Europe is the continent that is most dependent on imported land. This land is embedded in the products and services that we consume every single day. Shockingly, we consume 1.5 times the size of the European continent. And in the EU, average land consumption per capita is 1.3 hectares, whereas in China and India it is only 0.4 hectares. I believe a representative from SERI will take the floor later in order to further explain and break down these figures of how much we consume. So the questions that we need to ask ourselves are the following. Is this fair? What impacts is this having? How can we ensure that our resource consumption is fair and equally distributed around the globe? It is our hope that Friends of the Earth Europe's conference on land will achieve its goal of being a forum for open and frank discussion, a forum in which these questions should be addressed and debated with a view to resolving the serious issues that our planet faces today. We at Friends of the Earth sincerely believe that we should be putting some limits on our consumption of natural resources. We believe it is possible to find a way to enable the world's population to live well and at the same time consume less. But how do we decide what these limits are? We clearly need to start measuring our natural resource consumption so that these can be estimated with a reasonable degree of accuracy. What policies does Europe need to abandon or introduce in order to ensure that we are not consuming more than our fair share of resources or the continent's environmental space? Should we be promoting policies that increase our land consumption, such as biofuels? As you all know, biofuels are an increasingly controversial topic that a number of NGOs are addressing. and I believe a representative from Oxfam will speak about this in more detail. But just briefly, Friends of the Earth's position on this topic is that we believe it is absolute madness to use food to fuel cars rather than using it to feed people. Our members have organised actions and demonstrations in many different cities to protest against this. Every year, Europe burns enough food as biofuel in our cars to feed millions of people. Biofuels are fueling hunger, land grabs, and climate change. In Indonesia, for example, there is a huge threat to communities and rainforests from the expansion of palm oil due to European biofuel demand. Another question is whether we should be drastically reducing our meat consumption. When the Resource Efficiency Roadmap was negotiated in Parliament, the bold introduction of a paragraph on this issue by the rapporteur caused a great deal of controversy. Can this be achieved? We argue that it must be possible, given its potential impact. But the main question in all of this is whether we should start reducing our consumption. This is by no means a negligible problem. It is a pressing issue and one that cannot go unanswered any longer. At the moment, 20 countries around the world consume more than 3/4 of material resources, whereas 100 countries at the other end of the spectrum only consume 1.5% of material resources. This overconsumption of resources by a small minority is the major cause of many of our current environmental problems, such as climate change, water scarcity, and biodiversity loss. Just to focus briefly on the problem of climate change, I'm sure you'll all be aware of the recent landmark UN report published in September, which stated that scientists are now 95% certain that humans are the dominant cause of global warming since the 1950s. The report contained a warning that continued emissions of greenhouse gases will cause further warming and changes in all aspects of the climate system. Containing these changes will require, and I quote, substantial and sustained reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. Our current systems of consumption and land use are having an extremely negative impact on the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And this report only serves to highlight how urgently we must adopt more environmentally responsible practices in this regard. Ironically, we have policies that try to deal with the consequences of our high consumption levels, but so far there has been no concrete policy developed to ensure that we actually reduce our resource consumption and minimise the environmental impact of our activities on this planet. On top of that, Europe still wastes massive amounts of resources. For example, Europe is a net importer of food and animal feed, which incidentally has a huge land footprint. And yet we waste around 1/3 of it, which equates to approximately 115 kilograms per year per person. This conference aims to discuss Europe's overall consumption of land, the social and environmental consequences this is having, and how we can reduce the amount of land we consume and still have a high quality of life. We want to use this conference to formulate clear policy proposals for the EU institutions and the EU's governments. Improving our use of land is not only a necessity, but also an opportunity to improve the state of the environment, to have a positive social impact, and to boost the continent's competitiveness. We want to hear from everybody. Each session will include time for questions and a debate, and I would like to encourage you to participate as much as you can. We have also created a Twitter hashtag, LandConf13, that's LandConf13, which you can use throughout the conference to post your tweets about the proceedings. Thank you very much.